Marching through Mexico, the Migrant Caravan is growing and drawing closer to the United States. We're at the White House with President Trump's response. Catholic in America, the next installment of News Nightly's exclusive polling examining how the media covers the church. Direct message. One of the most followed Catholics on social media tells us what he wants to come out of the synod on youth. And remembering a saint. On his feast day, a look at the life and legacy of one of the most beloved figures in recent church history. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, October 22nd, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. President Trump calls the caravan heading from Honduras a national emergency. The president claims the group heading to the U.S. is mixed with criminals and Middle Easterners, and he's alerting the Border Patrol and U.S. military. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. President Trump now says he'll begin to cut or substantially reduce millions of dollars in aid to Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador because they haven't stopped this 7,000-person migrant caravan. The president is in Houston tonight for a rally, but before he left, I asked him how cutting aid to Central American countries will keep migrants from fleeing to the U.S.
If you cut aid to Central America, won't that cause more migrants?
Look, I can't tell you. I can only tell you this. We give them hundreds of millions of dollars. They do nothing for us.
How will cutting aid keep migrants from...
You know what? Maybe it will and maybe it won't, but it certainly hasn't affected. They could do a lot better job.
And President Trump says a fairly big percentage of the travelers from Central America are criminals. This Honduran migrant refutes the claim.
Our message is we're not criminals. We're coming over here because we want to work. We need a job. We need better, a better life.
Bill Canny, who runs the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops' Office for Migration and Refugee Services, tells me many of the migrants are fleeing extreme poverty and violence.
I don't think there's a reason for the American people to be fearful about people such as this coming to our borders if they get there and asking for asylum.
The migrants are still more than 1,000 miles from one of the closest U.S. border crossings in McAllen, Texas. But 2 weeks out from crucial midterm elections, President Trump believes their journey will pump up his base.
I happen to think it's a great issue for the Republic. This is a great Republican issue.
He tweets, "Every time you see a caravan or people illegally coming or attempting to come into our country illegally, think of and blame the Democrats for not giving us the votes to change our pathetic immigration laws. Remember the midterms. So unfair to those who come in legally." And the president says this caravan won't be crossing into the U.S. on his watch.
I will seal off the border before they come into this country, and I'll bring out our military, not our reserves. I'll bring out our military.
A spokesman for El Salvador's president says they hope the tension over the migrant caravan will calm down after U.S. midterm elections on November 6th. He says a drop in violence in El Salvador has already cut the flow of migrants leaving the country by 60% in 2 years. Lauren?
White House correspondent Mark Irons. Thank you, Mark. And joining me now for more analysis is Mary Walter, WMAL radio co-host of Mornings on the Mall with Mary. Mary, welcome back to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
We just heard the president say that he is threatening to cut off aid if this caravan makes it through Mexico. And you heard our White House correspondent Mark Irons ask him, how will cutting aid help? What's your answer to that question?
Well, first of all, the president can't just cut the aid. It has to go through Congress. There are things that have to be done in order for that to happen. So the odds of it happening, it may be curtailed, but it's probably not going to be cut off entirely. So that's the first thing. But my question is, in these countries, how much of that aid actually gets to the people? How much of it is derailed and goes to government and goes to some of the lawmakers in those countries? And how much of it is actually going to the people? Where's that money going? And I think that's a really valid question. It's my tax money. It's your tax money. Is it going to the people? I don't know if it is, and I think that's a very valid question to ask.
We now have another very powerful visual representation leading into the midterms. What are we, 15 days away or something like that? I'm
15 days.
15 days. So this is much like the pictures of family separations that we saw earlier and the detention centers like this one. It is energizing both sides. The president says it benefits Republicans. Who do you think it benefits more, Republicans or Democrats?
I think it benefits both sides. What I found very telling is Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer sent out a memo to their people telling candidates, Democrat candidates, to not discuss immigration. Now that says to me that they know it's not a winning issue for them. They said to keep focused on health care, to not be distracted by this group of migrants who are coming across the border. So I found that was very telling.
Later in the program, we're going to be talking about our Catholic in America media monitoring project, which we have done for the last several months. And Joel Rubin of the LA Times, I'd like to show you this, wrote this: "If there were any lingering doubts about the church's stance, Archbishop Jose Gomez erased them when he put his name and the church's considerable influence behind a fundraising drive for immigrant families who were separated while trying to enter the country." How do we find collectively as a country solutions that not only ensure safety but the dignity of the human person?
Well, I mean, that assumes that it is our responsibility to solve the problems in Honduras. It is our responsibility to solve the problems in El Salvador. It is our responsibility to solve the problems in Guatemala and Mexico, and then you can just go down into South America too. You know, if you wanted to, if you really want to ensure their safety, let's just send planes and put everybody on it who wants to come to America and bring them here safely, right? I mean, because you don't want them to make the trek. They're putting their children in danger. I'm really shocked at how what they're doing with some of these kids. Look at the pictures, though. It's mostly men. It's mostly young men and men.
And
I have not seen a lot of women and children.
Economic
right.
Ability to provide for their family. That could be one, or wanting to escape violence. That could be two.
Well, economic sanction will not get you here. It will not get you.
Correct.
And there are plenty of people in Chicago and Baltimore who flee violence every day too. So I don't know how many people. I mean, how many people do we absorb?
Correct. And that is it. When I was there, I was on the border of Texas and Mexico, and my takeaway was there is no easy answer. I'm going to have to go. Mary Walter, WMAL radio co-host of Mornings on the Mall. The Trump administration is considering returning to traditional definitions of men and women based on their gender at birth. The Obama administration loosened Title IX rules to accommodate people who identified as transgender. The Health and Human Services Administration is working on a draft proposal to reverse the change. President Trump says he's not satisfied with the explanations he's heard about the death of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Plus, there is new surveillance video tonight showing an apparent body double leaving the Saudi embassy in Istanbul, where he was last seen. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reports from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Officials here say they want a clear picture of how Khashoggi died and where his body is now. So far, the Saudis have offered conflicting accounts of exactly what happened.
Jamal Khashoggi, a longtime critic of the Saudi royal family, died in a fistfight. At least that's what Saudi Arabia's government says. Officials finally announcing the Washington Post contributor's death on TV, almost 3 weeks after he was last seen walking into the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. Saudi Arabia's foreign minister says it was a tremendous mistake carried out by a rogue operation where individuals exceeded the authorities and responsibilities they had. German Chancellor Angela Merkel doesn't believe that story. Merkel is backing a freeze on arm exports to Saudi Arabia while the investigation continues. Turkish President Erdogan vows to lay out the details of their own investigation tomorrow. Turkish state television released this surveillance video and pictures of what they call a body double, wearing Khashoggi's clothing and leaving the consulate. He's then seen entering a public bathroom and exiting in different clothing. Inside the building, Turkish media say the 59-year-old was attacked by a 15-man Saudi team that dismembered him. Back in the U.S., lawmakers are appalled.
I think the cover stories from the Saudis are a mess. You don't bring a bone saw to an accidental fist fight inside an embassy in Turkey.
The Saudis for too long have been given a pass in killing innocent civilians in Yemen, in suppressing dissent in their own country, in imprisoning women activists and other kinds of suppression of human rights and liberties.
Saudi officials have been quick to defend the crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman. The foreign minister claims the prince didn't know about the attack. The investigation seems far from over. Turkish media reports police in Istanbul has found a car belonging to the Saudi consulate about 9 miles away from the building, but they still need court permission in order to search it. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reporting from the State Department. The State Department weighs in on an Orthodox religious split, saying it supports the Ukrainian church, which is severing ties with Moscow. In a statement over the weekend, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the U.S. strongly is in favor of, quote, the freedom of members of religious groups, including Ukraine's Orthodox community, to govern their religion according to their beliefs, free of outside interference. It's not clear if or when the push for independence will be granted. Kiev's Orthodox community has been under Russian leadership since the 1600s. There are fears the move will lead to violence. It also raises concerns about what will happen to the roughly 12,000 churches in Ukraine currently under Moscow's patriarch. Pope Francis and the new president of Colombia met at the Vatican. On the agenda, the migration crisis in Latin America. Pope Francis met with Ivan Duque about thousands of refugees entering from neighboring Venezuela. The Vatican addressed the Holy See's contribution to the peace process with leftist rebels. Pope Francis helped broker that deal, visiting the country last year. Protection of life and fighting drug trafficking were also brought up. Our next guest is one of the world's most followed Catholics on social media.
Hey everybody, it's Bishop Barron. I'm here in one of the great places in the whole world, one of my favorite places, St. Peter's Square.
Bishop Robert Barron is the founder of Word on Fire Catholic Ministries and auxiliary bishop of the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. He's taking part in the Synod on Youth that's wrapping up this week in the Vatican. Bishop Barron, welcome to the program. Your Excellency, a number of Synod participants have said they want this final report to be inclusive of young people with same-sex attraction. Is this important in your view?
Well, I think the outreach to everybody. You know, we're standing here in St. Peter's Square and you have the Bernini colonnade, which symbolizes the church's outreach to absolutely everybody. And I think we want to have that reflected in the document. At the same time, the church reaches out in love. Love means willing the good of the other, and that means calling people to conversion. So my hesitation about just the word inclusion is it's not really a biblical or traditional word. The word is love. And that means indeed to reach out to everybody, but also to call the conversion. So that's my hope for what will be reflected in the document.
What are the other priorities? You've been sitting in these meetings. Tell us.
I think we've talked a lot about social media. We get that the young people live very much in the world of social media. We get the pros and cons of it. That's come up a lot. How it connects us, but also how it can lead to superficiality, it can lead to a disassociation. But what I've been stressing very much in the Synod, and many people I think have picked up on this, is what an enormous evangelical opportunity we have with the social media to find the nones, right? The N-O-N-E-S. This huge army of young people who have no relationship to our church, but we have to go find them. But through God's providence, we have this extraordinary means now to reach out to them. So I think a lot of the groups have been emphasizing the importance of social media, not just as the milieu in which young people live, but as an evangelical tool. That's been a major priority. Another one I would say is spiritual fatherhood and motherhood. The young people are saying that they want to grow in holiness, and they want models and teachers to show them how to walk the path of sanctity. And so being a mentor, being a accompanier, to use the language of Pope Francis, I think the young people want that. They want training in holiness. That theme has come up a lot.
You were talking about social media. You have a huge following. Your YouTube videos have been viewed over 30 million times. You have 1.5 million followers on Facebook. What's your secret for spreading the good news? How can the church learn from that?
Well, you know, we started very small, and we started in a kind of experimental frame of mind to see what would work. What I've tried to do is emphasize the seeds of the word. You know, the church fathers use that term, the semina verbi, the seeds of the word that can be found within the culture. And God knows our culture is compromised in many ways. Nevertheless, there are hints and echoes and seeds of the gospel that you can find in movies and in plays and in books and in music and in the popular culture. So I've tried to find those and use those as a route of access. And then see, once we draw people in, I've done a lot of other videos about scripture, about the theology, about St. Thomas Aquinas, but I draw them in through the appeal to the culture. So it's more of a positive path, not so much wagging the finger at the culture, but to say, hey, look, these are elements that are redolent of the gospel, and that draws people in. Also, something I've really emphasized is that it's a smart presentation. I hate dumbed down Catholicism. That's what my generation got. And it was a pastoral disaster. And you can see it now in survey after survey. Young people who are clueless about the faith. I think people, especially young people, have responded positively to the intellectual quality of the work that we've done at Word on Fire. And to me, that's an encouraging sign. So to make it beautiful, make it smart, and to reach out in a positive attitude toward the culture, that's been our formula.
According to our Catholic in America poll, media coverage this summer of the Catholic Church has been mostly negative and includes mostly church sex abuse stories. So how does a young person weed through that on social media and get to the positive content?
Well, you know, to some degree, I get it. I mean, we've been through a very difficult period, and there are these scandals that need to be addressed, and the church has to address them with accountability and transparency at all levels. So I get it. If young people are feeling frustrated, I'm feeling frustrated. A lot of Catholics are. So good. You know, I think I understand that. We have to reach out now in this attitude of transparency and accountability. Now, even in the worst of crises, we continue to do our work. It's wrong for the church simply to stop and start wringing our hands. We continue to preach the gospel. We continue to announce Jesus Christ. You know, the church has been marked from the beginning by difficulty, by scandal, by division, etc. So we don't stop in our tracks. We keep announcing the gospel, but also we try to respond to these very real concerns. I understand young people feeling frustrated. You know, you look at the polls now over many years. For the past 10 years or so, the scandals have not been high on the list when young people are asked, how come you're leaving the church? Now, in recent months, they've gone back up, understandably. So we have to respond to that, but also we don't wring our hands. We keep doing our work. We keep announcing the gospel.
Bishop Robert Barron, Auxiliary Bishop from the Archdiocese of Los Angeles and the founder of Word on Fire. Thank you so much for joining us.
God bless you. My pleasure.
Another American bishop has a message for youth saying it's clear clergy sex abuse is both a crime and a sin, and it has no place in the church.
We have to speak to the young people of the world, and we have to speak in an empathetic way. We need to let them know that we understand what has happened, the gravity of what has happened, and that we're committed to rebuild our credibility and trust.
Frank Cajano is the Bishop of Bridgeport, Connecticut. He made the comments during a Vatican press conference. He has launched a comprehensive review of claims against priests in his diocese over the last 65 years. And the Catholic Diocese of Buffalo acknowledges it is the subject of a federal inquiry into clergy abuse. Officials say investigators collected documents last June but have not been in contact since then. Bishop Richard Malone is under pressure to resign over his handling of priests accused of misconduct. He has apologized, but also says he will not step down. Coming up, our exclusive polling numbers reveal how the mainstream media covers the Catholic Church and how faith issues are affecting the midterm elections in a battleground state. We'll be right back. In tonight's installment of Catholic in America, we begin our exclusive analysis of social media and online and broadcast news related to the Catholic Church and issues important to Catholics. As expected, our research by Kantar Media found the summer months filled with negative news about the priest sex abuse scandal. It was referenced in 75% of the media coverage in the months of August and September, almost double from the previous months. Let's take a look at Catholic Church sentiment by week from the beginning of June to the end of September. The red indicates the percent of negative stories, 60%, actually 59.5%. That's going to be important. The gray is neutral, 40%, and the blue, 0.5%, represents the positive stories about the Catholic Church. In those negative stories, in addition to the sex scandal, included the battle over the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court, and the church's support for immigrants also gained attention. Christian and Catholic conservatives are getting out the vote. They're urging voters to consider the issues like the new tax laws, child tax credit, immigration, and abortion.
I had 3 miscarriages, and it was so detrimental to my heart, and I can't imagine how abortion can be legal after wanting a child so badly of my own and, miscarrying. And then sanctuary cities. My parents escaped from Cuba and came to this country legally.
Patty Hidalgo Menders is a Catholic volunteer with the Faith and Freedom Coalition. They are telling Catholics and evangelicals where candidates stand on issues, and the group has knocked on more than 1 million doors in 21 states. The Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. says 5 of its most valuable artifacts are fake. They were thought to be part of the historic Dead Sea Scrolls. Officials have removed them from display. Steve Green, the museum's founder and chairman, will not say how much the museum spent on them. Up next, honoring St. John Paul II on his feast day. And young Catholics in Iraq send a unique message to Pope Francis. Pope Francis visited the tomb of St. John Paul II today on his feast day. The saint is buried in St. Peter's Basilica. He was born in Poland in 1920. In 1978, John Paul became the first non-Italian pope in more than 400 years. He was pope for 27 years and was canonized in 2014. Joining us now is Father Michael Paolo, who is the rector of the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas, known as the Angelicum. Welcome to the program, Father.
Thank you very much for having me with you.
The bells rang just as I introduced you. How appropriate. St. John Paul II is one of your university's most prestigious alums. What can you tell us about his educational and spiritual journey while he was there, and does it continue for students today?
He spent 2 years at the Angelicum and got his doctoral degree at our university. It was in 1946 and 1948. And, he came back in 1979 to, I would say, to articulate for us our ideal of education. He delivered his speech, which can be today described as our Magna Carta of education at the Angelicum. And he tried to encourage us to continue our work on Thomas Aquinas in such a way that his work may be a backbone for our education, and at the same time allow us to confront the modern world, become for us a tool to understand the world around us in one holistic synthesis. So, the great legacy of John Paul II and of St. Thomas Aquinas of the Angelicum is to understand the world with the tool of Thomas Aquinas' philosophy and theology.
This morning you inaugurated the new school year by quoting St. John Paul II. Do not be afraid, open the doors to Christ. Why did you do that?
Well, it's the program that is always relevant for the Catholic Church, and which has such a power and energy in itself that we all badly need it as well today.
We are almost at the end of the Synod on Youth, and JP2, St. JP2, had a very special bond with young people. How did he connect with them so well?
Well, I would say that he tried to be natural, to be authentic in his manner of contacting the people, the young people as well. At the same time, I think that he always tried to be a witness of faith and tried to speak about the most important things. and it was appreciated, and it was his secret, I think.
Father Michael Paolo, thank you so much for joining us, Rector of the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas in Rome.
Thank you for having me with you.
Finally tonight, young Iraqi Catholics are sending a message to Pope Francis.
Gracias. Merci beaucoup. Grazie. Thank you. Spasibo. Shukran.
Shukran. Safa, a delegate in the Synod, organized the video to thank Pope Francis for his words of encouragement to young people in his country. And they say the love the Holy Father showed them has been so helpful, and that they are praying for him. It's so exciting to see them all revved up like that. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching us. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and at Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. We leave you tonight with images of St. John Paul II on his feast day. Pray for us. Good night and God bless.